Anna asks, is Dogen's Shikantaza similar or the same as, or related to Dzogchen in some way? If so, why are there no preliminary practices for Shikantaza? Sorry.
Yeah, Shikantaza. Shikantaza means just wholeheartedly sitting. And yes, I think if I was mentioning a lot of similarities between Zen and Dzogchen, some differences are, Dzogchen traditionally emphasizes the Nundro preliminary practices. We could find that similar principle in Zen. It's just not so structured, and it's not 100,000 counting, but these kind of devotional practices are quite prominent in Chinese and Japanese Zen. The principles of Nundro, of refuge in Buddha, and reciting that daily, bodhicitta, like these 4 vows that we recited at the beginning of today's talk, making offerings to Buddha. Dogen has a whole essay on each of these. Dogen wrote an essay on taking refuge in Buddha, on several essays on bodhicitta, a whole essay on making offerings to Buddhas, a whole essay that's emphasizing repentance. We don't have Vajrasattva recitation, but we have repentance practice, confession and repentance of karmic actions emphasized in all of Chinese Buddhism, but including Zen, and devotion to the lineage and the teachers. So those principles are woven in, but they're not as structured and emphasized in Zen, especially American Zen. I think we tend to emphasize the just sitting part more. The teachers who brought Zen to America, maybe that's what they really picked up on. But in a American Zen monastery like Tassajara, there's a lot of ritual practice, group practice, and of course in Japanese Zen even more. But another difference in Dzogchen and Zen is Togao. Of course, we don't really have that principle, that kind of practice in Zen, although you could say like the principle behind it, like the whole universe in 10 directions is the radiant light of the self, is maybe a kind of a Zen principle of Togao. Now, as far as Shikantaza, that's just sitting, just wholeheartedly sitting. The ta is like a kind of exclamation point, like an emphasis. Shikantaza, and it means just sitting. And so people interpret this Shikantaza in so many ways because Dogen doesn't define it so precisely. You could say his whole Shobogenzo writings are all bringing out the meaning of Shikantaza, including his Buddha Nature essay. But sometimes I think people interpret it as just a shamatha practice, just letting go of all thought, and that's it, which could be considered shamatha practice alone. But sometimes it's interpreted like the precursor of Soto Zen in China, in that Saodong lineage, Hong Zhi's teachings of silent illumination is kind of a precursor to Shikantaza. And silent illumination is, in Hong Zhi's teaching, he says the silence is like the shamatha side, and the illumination is like the vipassana side. So it has a little bit more of like of accessing the radiance of awareness. But yeah, people interpret Shikantaza so many different ways. So because I practice Dzogchen and Zen, my understanding of Shikantaza would be more like Rigpa practice, like non-dual awareness. But that's just me.
No, I think, Reverend, I sort of also understand more or less in the same ways. I've known a little bit about Shikantaza from my Zen, a short Zen experience, and then even the Nyendro practice in Dzogchen, I'm not actually quite sure how long it has been around, because the structured Nyendro system we have here today is pretty much both sutra tantra practice, an amalgamation of the two, and I think also largely based on the Lojong, which seem to predate the Nyendro regime. So in the early sources, you don't really have the kind of Nyendro regime that you find today, and certainly not this strict 100,000 numbers and so forth. I think it has become a little regimentary now. But what you find
also in Dzogchen, we also have the particularly Dzogchen Nyendro of Kurde Rushin, which is maybe a little bit more connected to Togao practice, and very, very unique and unusual compared to Zen practice. So I think Zen has also been largely a monastic practice in Asia. So I think something about like, that monastic life and Zen really very communal in both China and Japan. So in the meditation hall, you sleep and eat on your seat in the meditation hall right next to another person. So you're really like all thrown in there together, and day after day doing all the ceremonies together. In a way, maybe that's like a kind of Zen version of Nyendro, just how to get along with all these people.
And the Dzogchen version of Shikantaza, I thought would be, as you said earlier, the shine you have to do before the actual mind-pointing instructions, the Tsenche, the shine with characteristics, and then the Tsenme shine particularly, where you drop all thoughts, the shine shamatha practice without characteristics. Marcus, shall we go on with the
maybe could I add one thing in here about Shikantaza? Is people, as I say, people interpret it different ways. In Dogen's universal instructions for Zazen, Fukan Zazengi, one of the instructions in there is this in Japanese, Eko Hensho, which literally means turn the light around and shine it back, which is a kind of poetic way of saying, be aware of being aware, like that. So so there's teachings like that are kind of pointing out Shikantaza a little more methodically. I think that's a particular kind of method in Zen for accessing Buddha nature. Turn the light around and shine it back.